Do you want another watch? Silly question. All watch enthusiasts want another watch. I want another watch. However, a few weeks ago I published a video explaining a catch-22 with my collection, which may restrict my watch purchases. Despite that, I'm giving a serious thought as to which luxury watch I should buy next. I'll review my findings with you on this episode of Adventures with Time. YouTube channels which focus on watches and watch collecting. I started this channel shortly after I became a watch enthusiast and collector to chronicle my activities in this hobby. My goal is to help other collectors, especially new collectors, as they explore the world of horology. A large part of my enjoyment of this hobby is experiencing many watches from all price ranges. However, there is a reason why I'm not adding watches, as I described in a recent video I published exploring the concept of being a watch addict. In that video, I explained the catch-22 with my collection. I like all of the watches in my collection, so I don't see selling any of them. I really want to add to my collection, but adding to my collection will cause some watches to be ignored, which I hate more than not getting a new watch. Therefore, I can't add to my collection. I did, however, rationalize that I could probably add a couple more watches to my collection before it became too large to enjoy all of my watches. I'll leave a link to that episode at the end of this video. Now I want to review with you the current watches on my radar as potential additions. You probably know which they are if you've examined the thumbnail. I think you'll find this an interesting comparison and may provide you with ideas of watches you may want to consider. In my 2021 year-end State of the Collection video, I discussed my goals for 2022. I mentioned that I was looking at another mid-tier luxury watch, something even higher end, price-wise that is, than my Tudor Black Bay 58. I was thinking about a watch that can serve both as an everyday watch and be used as a dress watch. Again, I'll leave a link at the end of this video. I think it will help other collectors if I describe my criteria specific to a mid-tier luxury or luxury watch. Now, before I get lectured on my use of the watch tier terms mid-tier luxury and luxury, let me acknowledge these are just terms I used when first looking for a higher-end watch whose price falls roughly between $2,000 US and $10,000. My Tudor Black Bay 58 on bracelet cost about $3,600. Now I'm considering a watch double or perhaps more than double anything I've spent on a watch before. I do not take such a purchase lightly. This would be a totally unnecessary purchase for a purely luxury item. I expect many collectors also need to consider the cost of a watch heavily before we make a purchase. I want a watch that can be used for everyday wear, a watch that goes just as well with business casual attire as with jeans or shorts. Also a watch that wouldn't seem out of place with a suit and tie. I'd like a watch with a great bracelet. By that I mean comfortable and easy to adjust on the fly. The watch should be able to pair with a nice leather strap, as I believe straps fit better into those dress occasions. I'm thinking of sticking with a plain three-handed watch. A date window would be nice, but no GMT, chronograph, or other complication is required or desired. Oh, I'm not a fan of power reserve indicators. I think they just clutter a dial. If a watch is an automatic, then it should be full of power virtually all the time. I would consider and perhaps prefer a watch with a diver's timing bezel as long as it's not too beefy, such that it overpowers the case and dial. I've stated before that I believe a bezel adds life to a dial, even though it isn't constantly in motion. I would like an in-house or manufactory caliber that is either COSC or METIS certified, something that is nicely decorated and visible through a display case back. I'm thinking of a dark green or red dial. You'll see this reflected in the watches that I'm considering. I think darker dials, opposed to something like a white dial, has a more subtle and sophisticated look, although there are some white dials or silver dials which really impress. That's pretty much what I'm using to judge my next watch. With these traits in mind, let me give you my thoughts on three watches I believe might be something I like. First, an overview of all three watches, followed by a heads-up comparison. I have always considered Omega to be a top-notch watchmaker, and the Aquaterra to be a great watch, and one that fits my criteria. Last year I was able to try on a few models to see what I liked. I determined the 41mm size fits my wrist better than the 38. I looked at the white dial, black dial, and green dial models. I confirmed to myself that I really like the green dial. This is a dark green, looking almost gray in some light, quite different than the sunburst green on my Seiko Alpinist SRPB 55. It has a rounded trapezoid date window at 6 o'clock that has a nice bezel that mimics the teak pattern of the dial. This model, with a mixture of brushed and polished finishes, is elegant yet sporty. Adding muddle to any decision on Omega is their recent release of the Aquaterra Small Seconds model. Although I haven't seen this model in person, to me the running seconds sub-dial gives both a vintage and sportier look to the dial. The Small Seconds seems to be available in a blue or silver dial. No green dial yet. Maybe that's to come. What do you say, Omega? Another contending brand for luxury watches is Grand Seiko. You've heard me mention several times that I fell for the Grand Seiko SBGH 269 when it was first released. This model, part of their Heritage collection, has a red dial reminiscent of the lacquered floorboards I remember seeing during a stay I had in Japan several decades ago. Hence, this watch really spoke to me. This was a limited edition watch, which is now only available on the secondary market, so I may have missed my chance on this one. The case has that Zaratsu high polishing for which Grand Seiko is well known. It has polished bevel indices and polished date window trim, which provides lots of surfaces to reflect light and give great wrist presence. The white birch is another beautiful watch, although I haven't yet been able to actually see it in person. I think it may be too white for an everyday watch. Lastly, in this current cohort under consideration is the German watchmaker Glashütte Original. A few months ago, the brand lent me the Green Dial CQ so that I could film a hands-on review for this channel. Now, this is a great looking watch from a great brand. A nice matte green dial with matching green ceramic diver's bezel. A date window at 3 o'clock that has white trim to balance with the beautiful applied white indices. The case is virtually all brushed with polishing on just the very narrow chamfered edges. This watch looks great in any wearing scenario. Certainly a brand and watch model worth consideration by any watch enthusiast. So we have watches from 3 great, well-established brands and 3 notable watchmaking countries: Switzerland, Japan, and Germany. Now let's take a closer comparison of these 3 watches. They do share some common features. These 3 watches are all available in stainless steel cases with a bracelet. More on bracelets later. All have nicely framed date windows. You may remember that one design aesthetic I don't like is a plain round date window. They look like they were afterthoughts and greatly distract from the dial's appeal. These all have sapphire crystals and screw-down crowns affording 150 meters of water resistance, sufficient for any aquatic activities in which I may participate. Dimensions of these watches are very similar. Grand Seiko does have a somewhat shorter lug-to-lug measurement, while the Glashütte Original is a bit thinner. I think the bezel on the CQ makes it wear bigger on the wrist. However, all 3 are suitable for my 7 and 7/8 inch wrist. All 3 watches utilize automatic in-house or manufactory calibers. Just looking at the movement specs, one may come away thinking that the Omega 8900 caliber comes out on top. Longer power reserve, greater accuracy, and high magnetic resistance, though its beat rate is slowest among the group. Also, Omega is the only brand that conducts independent certification through Metis. However, both Grand Seiko and Glashütte Original submit their watches to extensive in-house testing. In fact, Glashütte Original performs 25 days of in-house testing on their watches to meet many of the same standards required by COSC and Metis. I published a video recently on watch certification where I asserted that even though Grand Seiko and Glashütte Original don't use an independent testing organization, I still have confidence in the quality of their movements and watches. In fact, I believe that Glashütte Original's quality control tests are just as valid as those done by COSC and Metis, and maybe better. To me, the specific movement specs that might sway my purchase decision are its magnetic resistance and, more important, the jumping hour. This feature replaces a date quick adjustment capability and allows one to change the hour without changing the minute or seconds. This comes in handy while traveling and during daylight savings changes. One additional movement-related design aspect I'll discuss later is that of these three models, the CQ does not have a display caseback to offer a view of its beautiful movement. Their CQ panoramic date models do have a display caseback. However, the case is large at over 43 millimeters and isn't available in a green dial. Plus, I don't like the plain date window at 4 o'clock. So I don't think this is an option for me. Hopefully, Glashütte Original will realize that such a beautifully finished movement deserves to be seen on the 41mm CQ. What say you, Glashütte Original? They all have very fine movements, so I don't think movement specifications are going to be a big factor for me in preferring one of these watches over the others. Therefore, let's look at design aesthetic that may have influence on a decision. All have similar case shapes, with the Grand Seiko and Aquaterra having generous amounts of polishing on the bezel and chamfered edges, with the Grand Seiko, of course, exhibiting that Zaratsu polishing. The CQ has polishing just on the very fine chamfered edges. Presumably, the CQ would be less of a fingerprint magnet and will not show scratches as much. Not sure if that's a big factor for me. Nor is low light luminescence something I care about much. I'm not a lume junkie, hence the lack of lume on the Grand Seiko is of no concern to me. To me, wrist presence is one of the major components in any decision. But look at these three watches. Each has its own set of attractive elements. The Grand Seiko has that beautiful red dial, those razor edge hands, and beveled indices. The Aquaterra, with its deep green horizontal teak pattern, gives this watch an elegant look that can span dress and sports watch situations. The CQ leans more towards being a sports watch, but I did try it on my wrist with a suit and it works well, although I rarely wear a suit these days, and in that setting would probably go with my Tiffany branded Patek Philippe or Ball Trainmaster. I mentioned before that the CQ doesn't have a display caseback. Arguably the best looking movement of the three. It's a shame you can't admire it. Having said that, I really admire a movement once I've had the watch for a while. So is this a big deal for me? Probably something I could get over. On the plus side, with the CQ, you get one of the nicest and highly refined bracelets I've seen. Each link is composed of 3 pieces, polished centerpiece and 2 brushed end caps. Nice flexibility with those links. Each end cap has 2 eccentrics, something like caps that hold the pins in place. Turning the eccentrics unlocks and locks the pin so that you can wiggle out the end caps and pins. Built into the clasp is a micro ratcheted adjustment system. Since I would be wearing this watch as an everyday, being able to adjust the fit without tools or even taking the watch off is of great benefit. The Grand Seiko and Aquaterra have small clasps with no micro adjustment at all. One needs to use half links to adjust the fit. Not convenient for someone like me whose wrist changes with the weather. You calling me fat? There are a few other considerations I want to cover before I try to come to any conclusion on these watch options. The Aquaterra clearly has the lowest price tag, even without any deal or discount, which I believe are available. The Grand Seiko must now be purchased on the secondary market, and its price has increased some 25% over the retail price when new. My concern would be to find a like-new piece that still exhibits problem-free surfaces. Probably not an option at this point. The CQ does have the highest retail price. However, I have heard from a few people that they were able to get a discount from ADs. Even with a 25% discount, you need to shell out over $7,500 for this watch. Not a small chunk of change. Finally, although I agree with the adage that one should buy a watch for yourself, not for what others might think about it, there are some interesting differences in recognition and perception of these watches. Let me explain. Grand Seiko often gets lumped in with Seiko. Although there are significant differences between the brands, and Grand Seiko did become independent from Seiko in 2017, the cachet of Grand Seiko is recognized mostly by watch enthusiasts. That has both advantages and disadvantages. Few non-watch enthusiasts will be impressed by a Grand Seiko watch, which also means that Grand Seiko would be less vulnerable to theft. Conversely, Omega is a universally recognized brand with a history of producing high-end, high-valued watches. Everyone, collectors and average Joes, will recognize the Omega on your wrist. Furthermore, the Aquaterra is prevalent in a lot of watch collections. You won't feel special or distinctive wearing this on your wrist. The Lasciuta Original is different. Few people, even collectors, have heard of this historic brand. I hadn't heard about them until I was 3 years into collecting. I would feel proud wearing the CQ, a watch from a brand with more than 175 years of horology that has great engineering and design and superior testing capabilities. So which watch would you get? Will I get one of these watches? I don't think the Grand Seiko SBGH 269 is in the cards for me. It's a model that I would prefer to buy new from the AD and not at these higher used prices. I'm fairly sure it will not be the Omega Aquaterra. I want something more uncommon. Can I say special? The CQ fits virtually all of my criteria and is a special watch. Yet I'm not ready to pull the trigger. For one thing, I'd like to try the CQ panoramic date on my wrist to confirm that it's not a model I'd prefer. While I mull over my options, I want to monitor Grand Seiko for any new model that talks to me, as did the SBGH 269. Some of you will disagree with my eliminating the Aquaterra from consideration, while others will encourage me to stop hesitating and buy the CQ. I can take your criticism, but I much prefer your constructive input on these options and any others I should consider. So start typing. And after you submit your comments, you may want to watch this video about being a watch addict, or my 2021 State of the Collection episode, or this video on watch certifications like COSC and Metis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.